Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Jeff Green, president of the Green Team Home Selling System. I am here to talk about the housing market update for June of 2018, and I am joined by a really great panel. I'm going to introduce right now. When I say your name, just give a little bit of a wave so everybody knows who you are throughout the meeting. So I'm going to rattle off our Green Team Sales Associates first. Vicki Garby from our Warwick office. Vicki, welcome. Thanks for being here. We also have Karen Gonin, who is licensed in both New York and New Jersey. She's part of our Warwick and our Vernon office. Welcome, Karen. Thanks for being here. Joyce Rogers. There's a wave from Joyce. Welcome, Joyce. She is a sales associate in our Vernon, New Jersey office. And then let's talk about, well, let's not forget about Melissa Brzett, our marketing director. She's kind of the brains behind our monthly housing market updates. So thanks for being here, Melissa, and doing all the dirty work for us.
No problem.
So let's go on to our guest panelists for this month. Dan Bounds from Chase Home Mortgage. He is a senior home lending advisor and a friend of mine, and a great guy who does a really great job with loans. We're happy to have him, as well as Dan's Northeast Executive Director, Ed Mainland from Chase Home Mortgage as well. And we also have a very special guest. The Chase guys were very accommodating and have Tom McGlynn join us. Tom, give us a little bit of a wave. Tom is the Managing Director of Global Expatriate Services at BDO. Tom is going to talk to us specifically in reference to how the housing market is going to be impacted, or already is being impacted, by the new tax reform bill that was passed. It's a very important topic that not a lot of people are talking about yet, because it doesn't really have, hasn't yet set its teeth in. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in here, because we have a lot of content to talk about. And just bear with me one second while I take the slides. So I'm going to give a brief update on where we are nationally, as well as regionally, in terms of the housing market. So, you know, things are chugging along. We have a 5.3% year-over-year increase in existing home prices nationally. That's pretty strong. You know, one of the overall points that we want to make this month is that we're seeing differentiation between the pricing levels. I mean, obviously the lower level, low to middle, they're moving faster than the higher end. That's almost always the case. But at a pretty good clip, and this is what a lot of economists are worried about right now, is affordability, you know, for entry buyers getting into the marketplace, because prices are increasing at a pretty rapid pace at this point. You can also see regionally here, we have some information on which prices are moving the fastest. So here we have the West Coast moving at a much greater clip than the Northeast, let's say. So, you know, obviously supply and demand is taking hold. Some other interesting, you know, points here are, you know, foot traffic. These are things that you don't normally see all the time in terms of analytics, but it's interesting to see that there's been more foot traffic than there was last year, same period of time. Existing home sales, interestingly enough, are a tick down from where they were last year. So that's interesting. And I think that comes back to inventory problems, which we're going to talk at greater length. We're going to hear from some Green Team sales associates who are the troops on the ground. But you can see here it's a tick down in existing home sales year over year from a national level. So now let's just take a look at some more local, regional type of numbers. Here we have the average home price in Orange County. You can see that, you know, price in Orange County has really taken off. This chart goes all the way back to 2014, and you can see that, you know, it was a mixed bag of results up until this year. There was not, you know, truly price appreciation over 2014 until this year. So clearly we're seeing prices increase in Orange County. Here's what I call the mother's milk of all analytics. How many homes are being sold? You know, what are the units being sold? Interestingly enough, we've seen steady increase year over year until this year. This is the first time we've seen, you know, more than 1 month be at or less than the previous year. So I find that to be interesting. Despite the fact that there's inventory levels, I find it interesting that, you know, we are where we are with units sold. So we'll have to, you know, just keep watching this line. I think this is the most important indicator of when things are really going to take a downturn. Average days on market continue to go less and less. It means that the market's hot. It's a good seller's market. It's a good opportunity for sellers to sell their home, maybe people that have been waiting for a long time. Okay, and then here we are down in Sussex County, units sold. Again, pretty much the same look, although this month we see a pretty substantial decrease. I would say even on a percentage basis, that's pretty substantial. So it's interesting to see what's happening in Sussex County. We're going to check in with Karen and Joyce in just a minute to get their thoughts on maybe why that is. Average price, not what you saw in Orange County in terms of the consistency, but nonetheless an increase. One of the things we've been talking about now for months down in Sussex County is the amount of distressed inventory, whether it be short sales, REO, foreclosures, so on and so forth, which is just kind of stymieing price growth appreciation in Sussex County. Average days on market continues to go down. So, it's a hot market just on the other side of the border, just as well as it is in New York. So before we go into, talking about the tax code issues and how all that's going on, but let's just get a little bit of commentary from some of our panelists here, going back to the panel. So I guess I would ask this question of Vicki. Don't mind me putting you on the spot, Vicki. Do you get a sense of worry from buyers about the current price, or do you think that their biggest worry is that they just can't find a home?
I think they're more worried about not being able to find a home. I think the inventory issue is the first problem that they have. And then once they find a home, I'm having buyers get stressed out when it's taking a little longer than they'd like to get under contract because they want to lock in their interest rate. So I would say the second concern is getting in, as soon as they can to lock in their interest rate because they know those are rising. I have one particular buyer who is calling every day saying, the sellers don't care, but the rates are moving every single day. Paying $5,000 or $10,000 more for a home is a nominal fee monthly to a buyer. But when they're looking at paying a higher interest rate over the course of 30 years, that's a much bigger concern to them.
Okay. So rates and inventory are the.
Can I jump in real quick there, Jeff?
Yeah.
Just so you know, with Chase, I know a lot of banks require that you have the actual contract before you begin the process and lock. At Chase, we don't. As long as we have your one-page purchase agreement, we can get your customer started, get them. We can a lot of times have them cleared by the time we get the contract. It takes so long. But the important thing is if I've got that purchase agreement and it's signed, I can lock their loan and we don't have to worry about the locking. We do not have to wait for the full contract.
That's good to know. That's good to know. And Karen, what would you say about appraisals? Are appraisals coming in on point? Are we still experiencing major issues with that, or where are we with appraisals? I like to hear about that every month.
The appraisals are actually doing fine. They're coming in not much higher than required. They're coming in on point in New Jersey.
Yeah, appraisers are afraid to take a chance, Dan.
Yes.
They don't want the banks to come down on them. But that's, I think what's happened with appraisals is now we're in an appreciating market solidly. All the analytics are showing that. So I think that the appraisers are comfortable, coming in on valuations where they need to be. 2-3 years ago, we were having major problems with appraisals because no one was really sure what was really happening with the market. But I feel like they're more confident at this point and the comps are in place. So now it's becoming easier for them to do. All right, that's good. And then Joyce, one other question that I had was, everybody says there's no inventory, but when you look at the market, I mean, there are listings active on the market. I just get the sense that the physical nature of the inventory is just not what buyers are looking for. Is there a lot of disrepair, a lot of need for renovations on homes? That's the sense that I get. What do you say about that?
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you. There's not a lot of inventory that's in good shape at certain price points. Most of it is really total gut jobs, and buyers want what they want, and they're not understanding that they can purchase something that's in disrepair and make it what they do want.
Yeah, but I think the problem with that in most cases is people don't have the wherewithal to GC a project, hire a GC. It's disrupting to their, to their focus and their lives. And I also think another big factor is, let's face it, most households, mom and dad are both working. Who's
Yep.
got time to do it, So
Exactly.
yeah, and I think, it's been interesting to see, the evolution of flippers, investors over the last decade, where they were 10 years ago and where they are now. I see, a lot of these investors being a lot more savvy than they were 10 years ago. I see a lot of, high integrity people doing this and making it happen and doing a good job, and more investors are more in place. So I see them as actually an essential.
You know what, too, Jeff, on the other
Yeah.
side, I was been in a couple flips this past weekend, and it seems like the flippers are really cheaping out and making mistakes that normal people can see without, a regular inspector or what have you. There's been a lot of unfinished product, and it's the little things they're not finishing in the flips.
Yeah. Well, maybe to my point, maybe I'm a little bit behind the times already. It happened that quick. So now all of a sudden everybody gets into it, and there's a lot of people that don't know what they're doing.
Right.
And ultimately you get shoddy renovations and so on and so forth. So maybe it's just the same as it was 10 years ago. It just took longer to get there.
And then you're also getting the listing agents that are pricing them way over where they should be in Sussex County.
Jeff, I have to agree with Joyce. I've seen a few flips in the last couple of weeks and I know what a good flip is, but I've seen certain small things and a lot of big things where I can't say anything to my buyers, and I just keep saying it'll all come up in inspections. But some of the flippers are definitely using lower grade material. They're not putting the finishing touches. And when you're looking, like you said, at mom and pop, and they're looking at a wall that the outlet is not completely done and there's no cover, or there are wires hanging, or the ceiling is coming down, they can't get past it.
Yeah.
And all it takes is another week or so for them to finish, but they're so eager to get on the market, not understanding that they're actually destroying their chances of selling a home because it's unfinished.
Right. Yeah. And, I can tell you one thing that I experienced because, I own a bunch of different properties, and there's always work that needs to be done. Labor is hard to get right now. Contractors are busy. Good ones are hard to find and hard to get. Their prices are rising. Material costs are up. So, everything's pointing towards things costing more on all sorts of different levels. So, all I can say from my point is this is a better market than where it was 5 years ago. Regardless of what the problems are now, these are good problems, in my opinion, to have than where we were 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. That was a disaster where we were. Okay, so let me jump back into my slides here because I want to move this along, and I want to spend a lot of time today on tax. So before we get to your slides, Tom, these are just a couple that we thought we'd throw in there because we're hearing a lot about, of course, the impact that the tax code is going to have on the luxury market, right? The high-end market. I think that's where we're going to see a major impact. So this is just some interesting information here. You can see that, there's actually, despite the fact that the notion that I have in my mind that, the tax bill is going to be a negative impact on the luxury market. The luxury market's doing a heck of a lot better on a year-over-year basis, and you can just look at any one of these analytics to see that. And we took a look at just some regional stats, and Tom, I'm kind of priming you here with just some local information before we get to your slide deck. Even if you look from what you're looking at here is Hudson Gateway represents the New York side of the border, Garden State, the New Jersey. So you have New York on the left, New Jersey on the right. It's up, when you take a look at, 500 to 750, which is high end in both of those marketplaces. That is a luxury, so to speak. It's up, it's up on both sides of the border. So, so with that, let me introduce Tom McGlynn. So, welcome, Tom. Thanks for being here. I sincerely appreciate it.
Great to be here, Jeff.
Yeah. So I'm going to tee up the slides here. Let me just do a screen share here real quick one more time. And then I'm your person to show you to do what you need me to do, Tom. All right. So you can try
Thanks,
to get
Jeff. We could move a couple slides forward.
Okay.
The topics that we're going to share today really center around the tax reform legislation that was issued. We're going to talk about some of the comparisons between what we knew in 2017 and what's to come for 2018, some of the major changes that we see with respect to above the line deductions, the standard deduction, the elimination of the personal exemptions, itemized deductions in AMT. We'll talk about the winners and the losers, how it impacts you, and then selling your home.
Okay.
Ahead. The Tax Reform Act is officially known as the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It was what the president called his gift to the nation on December 22nd, 2017. And, when you look at the timing between December 22nd and the end of the year, we really didn't have a lot of time to analyze and understand what was included in the legislation. And most of the provisions, really go into effect beginning January 1st, 2018. And, when you're at a party, you can tell people that the future, because what we know from the tax reform legislation is that it's going to expire, and it's going to expire on December 31st, 2025. So everything with respect to tax legislation for individuals that went into place effective January 1, 2018 will expire on December 31st, 2025. And of course, if there's a change in administration in between, we could have a change in legislation, but what we have now is what we're going to have going forward.
Mm-hmm.
You can move that ahead, Jeff. Some of the big things that we'd share is that at one point we expected the tax rates to be limited to maybe 3 or 4 bands. That was discussed, between the Democrats and the Republicans, but the conference report kept these rates. But as you can see, there was a drop in rates from 39.6% in 2017 to a high of 37% in 2018 going forward. But the bigger thing that we need to focus on is that when you look at where the tax rates come into effect, the bands, the income levels at each of the rates was dramatically expanded. So as you can see, a married couple, as an example, a married couple filing a joint return in 2017 would hit the highest rate of tax at $470,700 of taxable income, whereas under the new tax legislation, you don't hit the highest rate of tax, which is 37%, until you're making over $600,000 for a married couple filing a joint return. And you can see that cascades down to the single head of household and individuals who are married filing separately. So the expectation is at the higher income levels, all things being equal, there's an expectation that people will actually see a decrease, if you will, in their federal income tax liability as a result of the change in the tax legislation. We could go ahead one, Jeff.
Hold on. There we go.
The same holds true with respect to capital gains. When you think of long-term capital gains and qualified dividends, again, we're talking about a lower tax bracket for individuals who have this type of income. And, we're looking at a 15% bracket as well as a 20%. In 2017, an individual would not hit the 20% long-term capital gain bracket until they were in the highest rate of tax, which was the 39.6% rate. But as you can see, the 20% rate in the new tax legislation really comes into play before the 37% bracket. Anything over $479,000 of taxable income for a married couple filing a joint return would be subject to tax at the 20% long-term capital gains rates. Now, the good news is that the 20% rate is lower than the 37% rate, but it just comes into play a little earlier than it did under the old legislation. And these breakpoints are indexed for inflation going forward. So based on the CCPI, the brackets will increase on an annual basis.
Okay.
Go ahead. Some of the major above the line deductions that we wanted to share, center around moving expenses. Individuals who move, from one location to another, if they paid for qualified moving expenses, which was movement of the goods from the old location to the new location and the movement of their family from the old location to the new location, were able to take a deduction, an above the line deduction, in arriving at their adjusted gross income. The new tax legislation removes the deduction for moving expenses. And that deduction is going to impact individuals who move themselves, but it's also going to impact the audience that I work with, which are US citizens who move abroad for their employers, and then non-US people who are moving in the United States to different locations for their employers. So this is going to be a big hit with respect to the elimination of the moving expense deduction. The other thing is with respect to alimony. I had mentioned at the beginning that a lot of the new tax legislation went into effect effective January 1, 2018, and would be applicable through 2025. One of the items that doesn't start until 2019 has to do with alimony. Beginning January 1st, 2019, there will be no longer a deduction for the individual who is making an alimony payment. And at the same time, there will no longer be a requirement to include in income the amount an individual receives with respect to alimony. Now, it's important to remember that this applies to divorce and separation agreements that are entered into after calendar year 2018. So any
so they're grandfathered in, basically.
Exactly, Jeff.
Yeah.
Exactly. Any divorce decrees that are in place currently or that are in the process would not have this apply. The individual would still get the deduction for the payments he or she is making, and the recipient would need to include that in income.
Well, perhaps by creating more friction to the divorce process, we'll see our divorce rate go down nationally. Wouldn't that be nice?
We could only wait and see, Jeff.
Okay.
We could go ahead one. Some of the big things that most people are going to notice right away has to do with the fact that the standard deduction has been increased almost twofold from 2017 to 2018. So you could see where a married couple filing a joint return is going to get $24,000 of a standard deduction. And the prior year amount was a little over 12,000. So that's almost 2 times as much, with the expectation being that more and more taxpayers may find themselves claiming the standard deduction versus itemized deductions, especially in light of some things I'm going to share with you in the next few slides. The other thing to remember is that the personal exemption, the roughly $4,050 for a taxpayer and his or her spouse or dependent partner and their dependent children, is eliminated, suspended through 2025. So no longer will you be able to claim a personal exemption for yourself or your spouse or domestic partner or dependent children beginning in 2018. So you could go ahead, Jeff. Some of the other things that we saw change, the medical expenses, the threshold fell from 10% in 2017 to 7.5% in 2018 for individuals that have medical expenses that they're paying out of pocket that aren't covered by insurance. If the sum of those exceed 7.5% of their adjusted gross income, they'll be entitled to a deduction. The next three topics are the ones that you all deal with every single minute of every day when you're working with respect to the state and local taxes. This is a big one, especially in the markets where you are. Individuals beginning in 2018 are only going to be allowed a maximum of $10,000 in the aggregate with respect to all of the state and local real estate taxes, state and local property taxes, and state and local income taxes that they pay. So when you think about New Jersey and New York and even Connecticut, we have property taxes that are in the 15, 20, 30 plus $1,000 range, and that's just property taxes. That doesn't even address the individual income taxes. And as Jeff I think mentioned, we find a lot of couples where we have both people working, and the income taxes that they're paying are huge.
Yeah.
And to have that limited to $10,000 is going to be a big change. The other thing with respect to the mortgage interest.
I'm sorry, can I ask you a question, Tom?
Sure thing.
Has there been any talk about this being double taxation? I mean, you're being taxed once and then taxed. I thought that was unconstitutional. Has there been any discussion about that at all?
Well, I mean, the issue, Dan, is that when people think about double taxation, they always think about the fact that you can't be taxed twice, but you have to remember that you have to look at that from both a federal and a state perspective. So the fact that you're not able to deduct the state taxes on your federal return doesn't change the fact that you will still be entitled to a deduction on the state return. Now, the obvious answer is that for individuals on the state return, they're still going to be entitled to claim a credit, if you will, for taxes paid to another jurisdiction, but an individual was never able to claim a deduction for taxes in their own state. That was never allowed. So we're going to find that, it's not necessarily double tax, but, just the difference between what someone was able to deduct in 2017 and then what they're only allowed to deduct in 2018 is going to be dramatically changed.
I just want to make one point on this tax issue, as I've been very interested and I don't know, I guess passionate about this issue for a long time because look, the higher the property taxes are, the less one can afford to pay for the purchase price. It directly takes equity out of an individual's pocket and puts it in the government's pocket. And I'm not a fan of that. And when you take a look at how we're taxed in New York and New Jersey, as an example, 75% roughly is, the number of that tax bill goes to the school districts. And if you take a look at, and look, my wife's a teacher, all right? My father was a teacher for 16 years, my uncle, so on and so forth. I come from a line of teachers. And I have no disrespect to teachers or administrators or anybody, but we simply have too many school districts. They need to be consolidated. That is why our property taxes are so much higher in our areas versus Maryland, Virginia, and those sorts of places, because the way that they run them down there and the reason why the property taxes are so low, they have one superintendent for the whole county. So it is going to be interesting, very interesting to see if this brings enough pressure in where places like where we live, the property taxes are just out of control. If finally now this in charge to consolidate the school districts, could be interesting to see what happens.
With respect to the mortgage interest, the thing that a lot of people haven't understood that I know you all make clear to your clients and the individuals you work with is that the change in the amount of acquisition indebtedness is really something with respect to new loans. Individuals who have an existing mortgage in place before December 15th, 2017 are grandfathered. And the only limitation is that the $100,000 of home equity interest deduction for HELOCs is no longer allowed beginning in 2018. So for an individual who has a $1 million mortgage before December 15th, 2017, let's say they bought their home in 2015, and they have $1 million mortgage, they're still going to be able to claim a 100% deduction for the mortgage interest on that $1 million because they held the debt, since 2015, but it's only for new debt incurred on or after December 15th, 2017, that's going to be subject to the limitation. So for example, if an individual on December 25th had $1 million mortgage going forward, the issue is going to be that only the mortgage interest related to the $750,000 of acquisition indebtedness is going to be subject to tax. And again, there's a calculation we've always done, to determine of the gross amount of mortgage interest taxpayers pay, how much is eligible for the deduction. So as you can see, if someone has $1 million, there's going to be some scale down in what's going to be deductible on Schedule A.
So Tom, just to reiterate so we all understand, if someone's out there today getting $1 million mortgage, they're going to be able to deduct the interest up to $750,000.
That's correct. The interest down up to $750,000 would be deductible.
Okay. And you smart guys have a way of calculating that, because that's not an easy one.
No, it's not. But the service has a formula that must be used to prepare the return. So we just follow the rules that are issued by the IRS.
Got it.
You can move ahead one.
Actually, before we leave this slide, can I just make one clarification going back to the state tax?
Yeah.
I'm noticing the bullet under little 3 that says the limitation does not apply for people carrying on a trade or business. That's an important point for a lot of our investor clients. So am I reading that correctly? That people who own real estate as part of a trade or business, whether they're investment properties, that 10,000 cap does not apply?
You're absolutely right, Vicki. I mean, for individuals that may have rental properties that they're reporting on Schedule E, 100% of the real estate taxes, personal property taxes that are incurred with respect to that property will be fully deductible. And Vicki, that brings up a good point too, with respect to properties that are held for investment. The mortgage interest limitation does not apply with respect to properties held for investment. So thanks for bringing that up, Vicki. That's an important distinction to make, especially if you have individuals who are carrying on a trade or business via Schedule E.
Okay.
Charitable contributions. This is going to be interesting to see where things fall out. The previously you were able to donate to charity up to 50% of your adjusted gross income. The limit's been increased to 60% of AGI. But the issue that we're concerned about is really as a result of the standard deduction going up to $24,000, a question has been raised if individuals may no longer find it advantageous, for lack of a better word, from a tax perspective, to make charitable contributions. So if you're already getting $24,000 of standard deduction and doing nothing per se to get the deduction, are you going to be inclined to make a charitable contribution where you're not going to see a benefit for it? So it's going to be interesting to see if charities see a downtick in contributions as a result of this change.
So I just have a quick question relating to that. So you're saying to me that the charitable contributions cannot be in addition to the standard $24,000 deduction?
That's exactly right, Jeff. An individual is allowed to claim either the standard deduction or actual itemized deductions, whichever gives them the best tax answer. We all just need to pay in the legal minimum, but it's one or the other. It's not an add-on. Casualty losses suspended through 2025, and wagering, gambling limited to income offsetting expenses. We can move ahead, Jeff. This is an interesting one. The miscellaneous itemized deductions, unreimbursed employee business expenses, tax prep fees, investment management fees and expenses have been suspended through 2025. So no longer are individuals even eligible to claim a deduction for those types of expenses that were subject to the 2% floor of AGI. The other thing is, and a lot of people didn't know the name, but the P's limitation, which is what limited, if you will, the itemized deductions an individual can claim if their income was over a certain threshold, has been suspended as well. So whereas in 2017, if you were considered a high wage earner, so that your itemized deductions were scaled down because of the fact that you made a certain amount of money, beginning in 2018 through 2025, there will be no such limitation. So what an individual pays, an individual will get to deduct, again, assuming that that amount exceeds the standard deduction based on their marital status.
Interesting.
Dirty word, AMT. The alternative minimum tax, just as background, was put into place to ensure that taxpayers weren't able to reduce their tax liability as a result of the use of certain itemized deductions. And the biggest one is obviously income taxes, real property, state and local income taxes. Because Congress eliminated the corporate AMT under the tax legislation, it was always expected that there would be an elimination of the individual AMT. But as you could tell from this slide and the fact that I'm speaking to the point, that never came to fruition. That was one of those last minute deals where Congress decided to keep the alternative minimum tax in place. But as you'll see from the slide, I mean, they significantly increased the exemption amounts as well as the thresholds to when AMT would apply. So the expectation is, more likely than not, more and more individuals will no longer be subject to AMT because of this increase in thresholds and exemption amounts. And in fact, coupled with the fact that individuals are limited to the $10,000 of income and personal property taxes that they can deduct from an itemized deduction perspective, we're going to find more and more people aren't going to be subject to AMT either.
That's interesting.
We could move that ahead. The winners and losers, I mean, we've done a few comparisons at a few different levels that you'll see over the course of the next few slides. If we just look at some of the big things, we can see that if you look at a married couple, as I mentioned, filing a joint return, in 2017, the standard deduction for that couple was $12,700, but based on their charitable contributions the combination of their real estate and income taxes and their mortgage interest, they were in a better position to claim the standard deduction. I mean, the itemized deduction, the $32,877. What we see in 2018 is that the individual couple will still be better off claiming the itemized deductions, but it's only by $1,000. So not a big shift there. And then when you look at the bottom line, you know, it's a slight increase for individuals at 125,000 when you compare what they'll pay in 2018 versus what they paid in 2017. If we move to the next slide, Jeff, I think we're going to see a $250,000. And again, you know, we're trying to compare, you know, a single individual compared to a married couple filing a joint return. Again, this year, what you see with the taxes, when you look at 2018 for both the individual, single, and married couple, is the limitation comes into play with respect to the deduction for the taxes. So whereas in 2017, the married couple had over $29,000 of taxes, we'll see in 2018, they're going to be limited to the $10,000. And we could see again, this couple is going to see a slight uptick in taxes. But the other thing is they were subject to AMT to the tune of over $3,000 in 2017, whereas they're not going to be subject to AMT in 2018. And if we move ahead one more slide, again, this comes to show when I talked about the P's limitation, the married couple had a scale down of their itemized deductions of almost $5,600 in 2017. And there's no such limitation in 2018. But the big takeaway, as you can see, is the fact that if you look at just the total itemized deductions going from almost $86,000 that were deductible in 2017 to only $35,000 that are deductible in 2018. And that was because there was some limitation with respect to the mortgage interest and the cap, as well as the $10,000 limitation. The interesting thing to note, and again, it's obvious to all of you, and it's been clear for many, many years that married couples and dependent partners filing a joint return received some preferential tax treatment. If you look at the bottom line, I mean, a couple filing a joint return with 500,000 of AGI are actually going to see a reduction in their tax liability by
$24,000.
Yeah, I mean, so the total tax in 2018, you know, 149,000 versus 159 in 2017, so almost a $10,000 savings in tax. And if we move to one more slide, I think, Jeff, I think we have a $750,000 bracket. And again, we're seeing a slight uptick in the tax overall. Again, significant change in the itemized deductions from 122,000 that were deductible in 2017 to only 35,000 deductible in 2018. But the thing that is going to ring some bells for everybody when we showed the first slide earlier in the presentation is that because the rate bands were spread so much under the new tax legislation, you don't see what intuitively you would have expected to be a higher rate of tax because of the bands being spread and the tax rates being reduced under the new legislation.
Right. So it takes longer to get there to those higher rates, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let's see, we'll go
Interesting.
ahead one more.
Okay.
This is an interesting slide in the sense that part of the legislation really highlighted the fact that corporations were going to see a significant reduction in the tax liability. As you might remember, corporations were subject to a tax at a high of 35% in 2017. And in 2018, that was cut to 21. So a question was raised, well, should we all incorporate and become corporations? So we're subject to a lower rate of tax. And the knee-jerk reaction might be for someone to say, yeah, that's what we should do. You know, we're going to save 14% in tax. We're only going to pay 21%. But the thing a lot of people didn't focus on is that by doing that, when you take income out as a dividend, now you're going to be subject
Capital
to
gains.
tax at the capital gains rates. Exactly right, Jeff. So the 21%, which sounds attractive, when you add 20%, let's say the high of the long-term capital gains to it, now you're looking at 41%, which is higher than the 37% normal regular tax income rate. And, you know, as we also discussed, depending on your income level, for long-term capital gains and qualified dividends, we could be paying either 15 or 20%, which is significantly lower. So again, it wasn't to say this was an immediate thing someone should do. If we move ahead one slide, another thing that impacts a lot of people, you know, with not only the purchase, but the sale of a home is the fact that nothing changed with respect to the home sale rules. There was an expectation there might be, but there was nothing that changed. So as long as an individual can show that he or she owned the home and used it as their principal residence for at least 2 out of 5 years, then the first $500,000 of gain is exempt from federal and state tax. Again, it's important that individuals understand their basis in the home, because that's the figure upon which the gain or loss calculation is going to take place. What you paid for the home, any of the closing costs that were not deductible or had no tax effect, and then any of the improvements that individuals made to the home. If we go ahead one slide. Again, we encourage individuals to carefully review the closing statement, because many of the items listed on this slide can be used to increase individuals' basis, thereby reduce the gain they may have to pay on the sale. And again, if we want to move one more slide, Jeff. We talked about the fact that there's limitations with respect to the property taxes, interest depending on the magnitude of the debt, and then points, again, claimed as an itemized deduction over the life of the debt. Let's go one more. That's what I had for the presentation. If any of the panel have questions they'd like to ask, be happy to take those.
I got all mine out. And does anybody else have any questions to Tom before we wrap it up here? Okay.
One of the things I would say, Jeff, just about basis, is for individuals who may choose to convert their principal residence to a rental property, it's important to, first of all, understand what your basis in the home is, but then at the same time to ask the question, in light of the market conditions that you all are expert in, is the basis that they have more or less than the current fair market value? Because the Internal Revenue Code limits the amount of depreciation deduction to the lower of the individual's. If the fair market value is lower, you can't use your tax basis for depreciation purposes. Obviously, if the fair market value is higher, it's, thank God, we've seen some appreciation, so you could use your basis for depreciation purposes, but you always have to ask that question to ensure you're not overstating the depreciation deduction.
That's interesting. I didn't know that one. All right. Well, we had to do it, Tom. We had to talk about tax at some point in time, and it's not an easy one for people to listen and try to focus on. And it's like, one of these topics that it's like, oh God, do I really need to sit here? But you did a great job.
Thank
broke
you.
down a very complex discussion into some very refined points, gave side-by-side analysis, which I always feel is the best. So that was really a good job. I learned a lot today. I think everybody else did as well. So let me just wrap it up by saying a big thanks to all of our panelists, Green Team, as well as Dan Bounds from Chase, Ed Mainland, and both from Chase, and Tom McGlynn from BDO. Thank you guys very much. We will post contact information for all of our panelists as part of the Facebook and LinkedIn posts that we do. And of course, recordings of this video are always going to be out there so everybody can watch them back. So thank you to everybody. This is a goodbye. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you next month. Bye-bye.
Bye now.